And it has actually changed everything we thought about the prehistory of this period. So let me show you some pictures. So this is one of those concentric structures here. You see there are pillars all around and two higher pillars in the middle. And the excavator has excavated 4 of these. It's difficult to excavate them because they were filled with bones and stone instruments. This is from the time that people were still using stone instruments. Bones from animals, hunted. All from hunted animals, because this is at a time that people were not living on one place. They had no settlements. These were hunters. So this was a shrine where hunters would gather for certain feasts, for instance. And there have been geomagnetic surveys of this hill, and they have shown that there are at least 10 more of these circles, if not 20. So this whole hill was covered with these giant circles, which are 10 to 30 meters in diameter. These are really big things. And every time, apparently, that they had filled one with bones and with stone tools, they would build another one. And now look at the architecture, first of all. It's quite impressive. 9000 BC, that is 11,000 years ago. It is really hard to imagine. And here you can see the size of these columns. They are real monoliths. They are really made from one stone, each of them. Some of them are 5.5 meters high. And that means that hundreds of people must have collaborated to erect them. This is one of them, one of those that is 5.5 meters high. And here you can see what is typical of these pillars. They have arms and hands, symbolically rendered, but no other features. This is the girdle, but that's it. So they don't have eyes or nose or ears or anything. So they are abstract representations. Because as I will show you, these people were quite able to represent almost anything, but in the case of these pillars they didn't. So these pillars are sort of anthropomorph, but they are so only in a very abstract, symbolic way. So are they gods? Are they people? Are they dead people? Are they spirits? We don't know. They are of a different layer of reality, says the excavator, and I think that is as precise and as fake as you should be in this case. So, here's some examples. On those pillars is sculpture. Sometimes it's full sculpture, as here, and it's from the same stone. This is also part of the monolith. So when they were cutting it from a rock, they already knew they would put one such animal, a predator, on it. There's also relief, like this boar here, and there are many animals like this. So there are foxes, boars, cranes, reptiles, there are whole nets, tapestries made from snakes, all kinds of animals, a complete view of a world. Here you see, for instance, a bull and a fox and a crane bird. And here again a fox. There are many foxes here. Many foxes. Fox is important. They are not the same animals whose bones are found in the enclosures. In the enclosures you only find edible creatures. So for instance a wild boar you would find there, but not bones from a fox. So really hunted animals. So these are these actually give a more complete view of the world of these early hunters who lived in central Anatolia 9000 BC. And it's not just isolated animals, but it is also a whole series of animals, as here. Here you see a vulture, maybe an ibis. This round object might be an egg, although apparently people are against this. A scorpion, and various pillars in a setup that suggests that they are linked to each other. Maybe even that there is a symbolic relation or even a narrative here. So it's not just isolated images, but it is a representation of a world as viewed by these people with a network of meaning, of links between those various elements. So imagine this. I know that scientists hate to speculate about these things, They hate to go beyond, you know, describing, you know, this is a vulture and this is an egg and this, or not even an egg, but a round object, and this is a scorpion. But it's really tempting, it's almost inevitable to think about this. This is a shrine where, you can see that at the stone tools, people from very far away came to celebrate some kind of ritual. And remember, hunters in this period were quite mobile. They could run for miles and miles. So from hundreds of kilometers people would come here, maybe even from Europe. This is quite possible. I mean, we know this from other European prehistoric leek shrines, that people would come from really far away. And they had this world with these pillars representing people or ghosts or gods. And they had all these animals that maybe had symbolic functions, that maybe were part of narratives. And they would also go back again. They will also go back again. And they would bring home stories. These pillars represent a very early stage in our mental DNA. Some of the stories that we still know may go back to stories told here, may go back to elements already represented here. Of course, that is very speculative, because we will never be able to prove how that works. We will never be able to draw a precise genealogy of these stories. But the possibility that these lie at the beginning of our imagination is very conceivable. So, here is then our hunter in the blue forest. And a dangerous forest it is, for that matter. In the forest lives a goddess, and this goddess is a dangerous goddess. She's known to us in the form of Kirke, a famous nymph or goddess described by Homer in the Odyssey. She lives on an island, a wooded island, and when Odysseus lands there with his companions, she changes with a with a potion and a magic wand. She changes the companions of Odysseus in animals, in swine, as shown on this Greek calyx. You see the swine with human bodies. And surrounding her house are other animals, like panthers. So she has changed some other people into animals as well. Now there are a few elements in the story told by Homer that seem strange. First, this Kirke has a beautiful voice, and she has beautiful golden hair. This is repeated a few times, but it doesn't have a function in the story. And also, when Odysseus finally goes to her house himself to find his companions and in the end rescue them, a deer appears to him, and he shoots the deer, and this deer sort of represents itself willingly to him. It comes to him, he shoots it easily. And then Homer doesn't say any other words about it again. Strange. So who is this Kirke? Well, in some of the earliest representations of this scene in the Greek world, Kirke is shown naked. You can see that in the upper right by the whiteness of her body, that stresses her nakedness. And this one too shows her naked, again with one of those Greeks turned into a swine. This is very strange. Later in Greek art, nudity is something normal, but in this period, absolutely not, and certainly not for goddesses. It is something very, very strange. Why would you depict Kirke naked? Well, this might be the oriental background of Kirke. I've shown you pictures last time of the goddess Ishtar, the famous mistress of animals, and also related goddesses. They are always represented in sacred nudity. Their nudity is a kind of extra power they have over a world that is dangerous for man. The world of nature. So there is a link here, I think, between Kirke and other goddesses in the ancient Near East, And one of them, as I said, is Ishtar, and Ishtar appears in the Gilgamesh epic. There is finally the Gilgamesh epic about which I promised to tell you. In the Gilgamesh epic, which I will introduce in more detail later, there is a scene where Ishtar, the goddess, tries to make Gilgamesh fall in love with her, tries to seduce him. And he doesn't want to know anything about it. He's afraid of her, and he gives her a whole list of previous lovers, and they have all changed into animals, because that's what she does. For a mortal man, it's dangerous to sleep with a goddess. Yeah. Don't know whether you have any experience with that, but Mesopotamians were convinced that you shouldn't do that. And Gilgamesh was very convinced of that. So he gives this list, and of course she's very insulted, and this has giant consequences for the rest of the story. So people have connected Homeric Kirke with the Gilgamesh epic, and they have said maybe Odysseus in this story is a version of Gilgamesh. You know, and people from Mesopotamia, they traveled. There were later versions of our hunter in the Blue Forest, and they told these stories, and these stories were retold and retold and retold, and at some point Homer picked up this story and used it in the Odyssey. This is of course not impossible, but there's something else going on here in our Blue Forest. Recent studies on the Caucasus have revealed a whole set of fairy tales about a goddess called Dala or Dalila. And Dala is a goddess with shining golden hair and a beautiful voice, and she appears to the hunter coming into the forest in the morning when the sun rises. The island of Kirke is the island of sunrise, by the way. And she sends a deer, the animal holy, sacred to this goddess, to the hunter, and the deer presents itself as a voluntary prey, so he can shoot it without effort. And by doing this, he is lured into the forest. And then he is confronted with her and with a terrible choice, because there is something called the hunter taboo. The idea is that you will not be successful in the hunt if you have sex. There is this very ancient taboo which is represented in many cultures, and this fairy tale is at the very core of this hunter taboo. So if he is seduced by her, he will be unsuccessful in the hunt, so he shouldn't do that. But if he refuses, she will kill him. So it is an impossible choice. If he sleeps with her, not only will he be unsuccessful in the hunt, but he will also be changed in an animal. This is the core of this story. And this story, which is very lively told still in Caucasian fairy tales, is very old. And how do we know this? Well, if you think of the ancient world, and the ancient world, sorry Damon, I have to walk out of your camera, is the area north of the Sahara, Europe, Russia, and more or less North India. In that part of the world, which is a giant part of the world, but a limited part of the world, in that part of the world, stories are told that are interrelated. Not just this story, but a whole bunch of fairy tales are found in this culture area. And one of them is this hunter taboo story. It's told in many, many versions. And it means, because it is limited to this area, and because all these stories seem to be related, that there must be a common origin to it. This must go back deep in time, like a genealogy, which of course we will never be able to trace, but which exists in reality. So imagine, the magic of this forest, where these first hunters were running to their shrine in central Anatolia, arriving there, telling stories about this fatal goddess, telling stories about success in the hunt, telling stories about a magical deer that would appear to them, telling stories about a fox maybe who had a role in this story, and going back. and weaving their stories with other stories, and telling their stories in new versions, story upon story upon story. But some of these elements, like this hunted wolf, surviving all these centuries, that is the power of these networks of imagination. This is something quite different from the division between East and West. This is something so tremendously powerful. And a very good alternative, I would say, to what Edward Said was doing, or was trying to show. So, all of this is more or less, for me, an introduction to how you should look at stories like this, and how I personally look at stories like this. And I have already told you, but maybe I should warn you again, that these lectures are, of course, not academic lectures. I'm giving you a personal account, of course, based on scholarship that I'm familiar with, but a sort of free rendering of that. Because I think that some of these things cannot be expressed very well in a very academic way. I think you get lost in the details and you forget about the wider picture. And this wider picture is essential to what I'm telling you today. So here's another iconic figure. The title, of course, already gives it away. The Sorcerer's Tower. I don't want to be arrogant, but I think that none of you has ever heard of Sidney Lee. This at least was the case for me until recently. But the Royal Academy has organized quite recently a first exhibition about this completely forgotten artist who is really very amazing. And used all kinds of techniques, and here you see that he uses a sort of photo which he paints over with aqua tints. Why I've chosen this, this tower, that is because I want to tell you about another fairy tale which is known as The Maiden in the Tower. And the story of the Maiden in the Tower is part of a larger story named The Hero Who Was Exposed at Birth. And I will tell you this story. Once there was a king, and the king reigns over a large kingdom. And because the kingdom was large, there were frictions in the kingdom. There were peoples that wanted to break away. There were people who wanted to take the throne from the king. The king was an anxious king. A king who always was willing to listen to signs about the future, was always afraid that the future would bring something harmful for him. So when it happened that one day somebody prophesied that his grandson would steal his throne from him, he made sure that this would never happen. His daughter was locked up in a tower, and the staircase was taken away, and all the doors and windows shut. And yet, a prince or an angel or a man seen by nobody managed to get into the tower. And the daughter does get pregnant. And she does get a beautiful baby. And when the king finds out that a baby has been born after all, he wants to kill it, and he orders his guards to put it in the wilderness. And now there are two versions of this story. One is that the mother prevents the exposure by putting the baby in a basket and putting the basket on water. And the other version is that the child indeed is brought to the wilderness, and it is left there in the wilderness, but wild animals find it, and they take care of the animal. And these animals, they might be lions, or panthers, or wolves, or bears, or dogs, or even snakes, or eagles. And in the case of this water exposure, if you want to call it that, it is simple people like fishermen, sometimes a gardener, who take the little baby from the water and take care of it. And in the case of the wilderness, it's also simple people, nomads, pastoralists, whatever, vagabonds who find the child in the wilderness, suckled by animals, and they take it home. In both cases, the child is raised by these humble people, but in the end, it returns to the city where his grandfather is king, and by accident or purposely, it kills his grandfather, and it becomes the rightful and good new king, because fate cannot be stopped. And everything in this story works to help the child. You have to think about this story. It is not normal for lions to suckle a baby when they find it in the wilderness. When lions find a baby in the wilderness, they eat it. But not in this story. In this story, this child is protected. And why is it protected? This is why I showed you this scene from the movie. This boat, this other world, this protection by nature. Why? Because this image of these children, and especially the image of the baby, is a very powerful innocence. It is a messianistic innocence. This particular baby will bring a golden age. It will kill the evil king. And something, a god or fate or whatever, is protecting this child to such an extent that even ferocious animals will take care of it. And it will even survive being put out on the water, like those two children in the movie. So there is an enormous promise in this story, and this is why this story is so widespread. There are 170 different versions, recorded versions of it, in stories from the north of India all the way up to Iceland, and from central Russia all the way to North Africa. In every period. And these stories go back a long, long time. And they are interrelated. The oldest version of it that we know of is the so-called Sargon birth legend, which we know in cuneiform, on clay tablets. And I will read it to you. The birth legend of Sargon, translated by Joan Westenholt. Sargon, the mighty king, king of Akkad am I. My mother was an Ain priestess, my father I never knew. I will give you explanations later. My father's brother inhabits the highlands. My city is Azopiramu, which lies on the bank of the Euphrates. She conceived me, my Ain priestess mother. In concealment she gave me birth. She set me in a wicker basket. With bitumen she made my opening watertight. She cast me down into the river, from which I could not ascend. The river bore me. To Aki, the water drawer, it brought me. Aki, the water drawer, when lowering his bucket, did lift me up. Aki, the water drawer, did raise me as his adopted son. Aki, the water drawer, did send me to his gardening. While I was still a gardener, Ishtar did grow fond of me. And so, for, let's say, many years, I did reign as a king. I did ascend all the high mountains, the black-headed people, I did rule and govern. Now, Sargon is a mythical king. He lived in around 2300 BC. He was a real king, and he was the founder of the first real world empire of its days, which was the entirety of Mesopotamia, Syria, parts of Iran. In the view of those days, that was the world. And the dynasty that he founded lasted only 4 generations and then completely collapsed and became the image of the rise and fall of empires in Mesopotamia, in Mesopotamian stories. So he became a wonderful king. He became somebody like Solomon. You would tell stories about Sargon. So these copies actually are from a later time. He lived in 2300 BC, and this text is from about 700 BC. So much later this story is still told, but we know that it is actually older. So Sargon of the mythical, legendary city of Akkad, he says, my mother was an Ain priestess. Now the Ain priestess was somebody who acted in a so-called sacred marriage, in which a priestess married symbolically a god. So from this union, apparently Sargon comes, but he says, my father I never knew. My father's brother inhabits the highlands, which sort of suggests maybe a demon or a nomad somebody unknown. This is the story that I just told you. My city is Azupirano. That means literally saffron city. So it's a fairy tale city, which lies on the bank of the Euphrates. Then she puts him in a basket. He drifts away in the river, and he is lifted from the river by a gardener, a water drawer, Aki. And Aki, he raises this child as if it's his own child. And then while doing the gardening, the goddess Ishtar grows fond of this royal child, and apparently it helps him to establish kingship. So what you find here is actually an abbreviated version of the story. And why is it represented here? Because then Sargon gives us, you know, a story of how incredible he was as this good king, as the one king who brings back a golden age. He crosses all the lands, all the mountains, he conquers the entire earth, and then, and this is typical for Mesopotamia, on the back side of the tablet, which is alas quite damaged, there is suddenly a completely different vision. You could almost think that it is a different composition, but it is the same. It is fragmentary, but I will read it for you. And the steer broken. The ewe ran about in the steppe. Why? Question mark. And the gazelle driven by the wind, the stag broken. The screech owl, always a very bad sign, kept crying out. For all its crying, what did it achieve? The wind blew. The onager, constantly running about, where is broken? The wind blows in the steppe. The onager constantly runs about, he twitches in the steppe land. They run off the swift move, where? The wolf did not spare the blood, broken again. The lion, the devourer of blood. The lioness, the spiller of blood. Its cup, the smearer of blood. It is constantly roaming by the degree of Shamash. Where is the wind, human habitations, concern for the temples? I think you get, although it is very broken, the image. This is an image of a wasteland. This is cities, this is culture turned into nature again, which was the ultimate nightmare for the Babylonian. Cities deserted, wild animals from the desert, like the onager, coming in, and the wind howling over what was once human civilization. So this is the complete opposite, and why? This gives this glorious image of King Sargon, this Messiah king, who was saved in this wonderful story and then crossed the entire earth. He conquered everything, but it was all vanity. It's all for nothing, because nothing is left of it. Only dust and the wind that blows. This is Mesopotamia. And we will come back to this next time, because this is also a very important part of the perspective of the Gilgamesh epic. And maybe one of the most important things that the ancient East, the ancient Orient has given us. This perspective about eternity, but also about vanity. And I've shown you this picture, which is quite good, I think, for this. You know, this was after one of the bombardments in Libya a few years ago, where gazelles actually were seen in the city. And of course that reminded me of those Mesopotamian stories.